In 2006, this street was really spotty. This museum behind me was closed. It had been closed for 7 years. The Lee House had been owned by the city, but empty and abandoned for 75 years. It was the art school, and when they moved to Overton Park, it became abandoned. And that was one of our big accomplishments to begin with the Lee House, is we managed to get the city to agree to sell it for $1. As long as we could find a developer that had the resources and the historic love of the place to restore it. So that end story was they spent $2.4 million restoring the house to an incredible Airbnb, and has been an anchor now to this street. Lowenstein House and the Pillow McIntyre House are both going to be under renovation in a few months. So it's very exciting time for me. Yeah. I've always been really interested in historic architecture. In fact, the first house I bought out of college was 1871 on the National Register in Sardis, Mississippi. So I've restored 6 houses so far on the National Register, and this one just caught my eye. It never went on the market. Bought it from Larry Block. And a friend said they had just been to a cocktail party there the night before, and it said me. And it really did. It was my personality. It's like you were in New Orleans. So we cut a deal, and Larry owned so much property downtown and had this belief that if you encouraged young people to buy historic property and help them out through owner financing and all that it would really bring the neighborhoods forward. And one of the best examples of that is martial arts. That whole string of buildings. And Larry was instrumental here too. He owned many of these historic structures, and gave people the leg up to do things that they couldn't have done otherwise with just their limited resources like I had. When we looked at land uses 10 years ago, it was almost all institutional. Very few single family houses. I was the only person living in a single family house in the whole neighborhood for a while. So it does make a big difference. We were brainstorming bumper stickers 10 years ago for this neighborhood. And one of my favorites, we never printed it, but was a neighborhood in search of neighbors. And now we're finding them. Well, the ideas actually were put on paper in 2006 of turning the area that you're developing into residential infill. Sympathetic, we use the word sympathetic, so that it played with the architectural style. Yeah, so you're right, we have been working for a while on it. And a lot of that population is either in Midtown or down on the island. So to build housing that's equal in its value and its beauty, but a little bit less, and completely walkable to all these institutions. I mean, who wouldn't jump at that? Particularly very excited that you have some restaurant and commercial spaces going in around that plaza, because that will keep people here too. They always say when you build a neighborhood, you have to have at least 3 attractions that provide really great food to keep people here. And I think that's about to happen. But even the idea of this type of development helping us leverage infrastructure improvement, whether it's streetscape improvement or lighting. And of course, the more people in the neighborhood, the safer it's going to be. We use that term eyes on the street a lot. But suddenly when you multiply it by the number of residents you're going to have there, it's going to create a huge safety presence as well as everything else. And that actually reaches a much larger radius than most people think. I mean, that means Morris Park will be getting a lot more use, and Health Science Park. And those people who bike and run will even have a further reach. It hasn't been officially named this yet, but we call it Jefferson Avenue Greenway, with all the tree planting Henry Turley Company did 8 years ago, because that's going to add additional on-street parking that has protected bicycle and pedestrian. It's going to narrow the lanes of traffic down to slow down the traffic. Still 2 lanes in both directions, but I mean, those improvements are going to really make a huge difference to Jefferson, and particularly the safety of crossing over Danny Thomas, because that will be protected bike and pedestrian lanes on that bridge. Yes, and in terms of city planning, and Steve Alderman was a huge help on this with LRK. They say when you pick your borders, you don't pick the center line of a street, you pick both sides. So we actually take both sides of Poplar to the alley behind St. Mary's and both sides of Madison. Yeah, now we do stop when we get to the medical center at Manassas. We stop in the center line, and we also stop at Danny Thomas because there's already strong ownership there. But in order to develop a streetscape property, like as we're dealing now with the Poplar Avenue implementation plans, you need to have a foot on in both camps. Morris Park, luckily, was drawn into the original TIF district downtown, and then we expanded that slightly when they did the expanded TIF district. So it stayed in, but we were also very intentional about taking in the gas station across the corner of Manassas and some of that retail space, because really Morris Park was such a challenge dealing with the crime element. So now with Morris Park under renovation, the landscaping design and the new infrastructure is going to add 34 pedestrian level lights to the park, additional cameras, security cameras, and we're also just simple things like limbing up the trees so that it's a better sight line across the park for security and for police observation. So got our fingers crossed. We're thinking March 2022 for the reopening of the park. And that's a $1.7 million investment that happened because the grassroots of Victorian Village wouldn't give up. We would go to so many city councils. I mean, you can't imagine how many times we had planning meetings and had the money in the city budgets only to find out that it was going somewhere else at the last minute. So our savior in this is the CRA, the Community Redevelopment Agency. They funded the entire bill of about $1.6 million for the renovation. The city has paid for the planning and development and the project management, but all of the costs, actual construction costs, are being funded by the CRA. And there's a lot of new things happening too. The neighborhood just north of Poplar, which we call Winchester Park, we're taking a lot more of an active role in helping that neighborhood come forward in terms of leadership development. And we're very excited about what's in store for north of Poplar too. Eventually we'll have Victorian Village filled up in terms of land uses, and to be able to start building very affordable, high quality housing in north of Poplar is really important.